don't tell this story often, mostly because people don't believe me. Hell, sometimes I don't even believe myself. But when I lay in bed at night and the shadows outside my window start to look just a little too human, I remember, and I know, it was real. This happened a few years ago after a brutal breakup that left me feeling hollow. You know the kind that makes you want to disappear for a while. So that's exactly what I did. I packed up my gear, left my phone on silent, and drove deep into a national forest, far from any trails or people, just me, the trees, and a few days of solitude. The first night was peaceful, almost therapeutic. I sat by my fire, listened to the sounds of the woods, and let the crackling flames lull me into something close to peace. I thought maybe this trip was exactly what I needed. Just me and nature, no drama, no heartbreak. But when I woke up the next morning, something was different. Another tent. It hadn't been there the night before. No signs of movement, no fire, no gear outside. Just a single, dull-colored tent sitting about 50 yards away in the trees. Too close for comfort. I told myself it was fine. Maybe someone else had the same idea as me, to get away from it all. But a feeling settled in my gut, heavy and cold. I hadn't heard anyone arrive. No footsteps, no snapping branches, nothing. It was as if the tent had just appeared. I went about my day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every so often I'd glance over at the tent, expecting to see movement, but it was still, lifeless. And as the sun began to set, a gnawing unease crept up my spine. That night things got worse. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps outside my tent. Not an animal, not the rustling of trees in the wind, human. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps circled me, never stopping for long, never moving too quickly, just watching. My knife was outside by the fire pit, and all I had inside with me was a small flashlight. My fingers wrapped around it like a lifeline, but I didn't dare turn it on. Then, the breathing started. Low, steady, just inches away from the thin nylon wall of my tent. I could feel my pulse in my throat, hear the blood rushing in my ears. Whoever it was, they were just standing there, listening to me breathe. I gritted my teeth, flicked on my flashlight, and shined it at the fabric, trying to make out a shape. Silence. The footsteps were gone. I unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. My fire had burned down to embers, casting weak orange light around the clearing. My knife? Gone. But the other tent was still there. I barely slept, and when morning finally came, I stepped out, expecting to see footprints, some kind of evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. Nothing. And worse, the other tent was gone. No flattened grass, no disturbed leaves, like it had never existed. I should have packed up and left, but something in me refused to be scared off by a trick of the mind. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just paranoid from being alone. That day, I forced myself to hike, to clear my head. But the whole time, I felt watched, like something unseen was just beyond the trees, matching my steps. Occasionally, I would stop, turning quickly to try and catch whatever was there. But there was never anything. As night fell, the unease returned tenfold. I locked myself in my tent early, clutching my hatchet and my flashlight. I left my fire burning high, hoping it would keep whatever was out there at bay. It didn't. I must have drifted off at some point because I woke to the sound of something scraping against my tent, light like fingertips dragging across the fabric. Then the breathing came again. I couldn't move. My body locked up, my instincts screaming at me to stay still. The breathing was right outside, slow and steady, And then a whisper, not words, just the sound of breath moving, shifting, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were there, wanted me to feel the fear sinking into my bones. I snapped. I threw the tent open, brandishing my hatchet, ready to fight for my life, but there was no one there, only the trees, and just beyond them, barely visible in the darkness, a figure, sitting, watching. I packed up before the sun even rose. I didn't care about sleep. I just needed to get out of there. But as I hiked back, the feeling never left me. The whole way, the forest was unnervingly silent. No birds, no wind, just my footsteps crunching on the trail, and something else just a few paces behind me. When I finally reached my car, I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost collapsed. I threw my gear inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. But before I pulled away, I glanced up at my rearview mirror. He was there, standing at the tree line, still, watching. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember feeling like no matter how far I got, I wasn't alone. That night I tried to sleep, but every creak of my apartment building made my skin crawl. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing just beyond the firelight. Then at 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I didn't answer, but when I checked the message, my stomach turned upside down. "Did you make it home safe?" I blocked the number. I told myself it was over, but the paranoia never fully went away. Weeks later, I came home from work and stopped cold at my front door. Sitting there, perfectly placed on my welcome mat, was an object I hadn't seen since that night in the woods. My missing knife. I moved the next week. I haven't been camping alone since, but sometimes, late at night, I still get that feeling, that itch in my brain that tells me I'm not as alone as I think. And when I look out my window into the darkness, I swear just for a second I see him standing there. I still don't know what to make of that night. I've told this story a handful of times, but every time I do, I get this tight feeling in my chest, like I'm not supposed to talk about it. Maybe that sounds stupid, but if you were there, if you saw what we saw, I think you'd understand. It was a few years ago, late summer. Me and 5 friends decided to do a weekend camping trip deep in a national forest. Not a campsite, not some place with designated trails, just real raw nature. One of my friends, Nate, had done this kind of thing before, so we trusted him to pick a good spot. It was a bit of a hike from where we parked, but when we got there, it was perfect. A clearing with just enough space for our 3 tents, surrounded by dense trees. The kind of place where the night feels heavier, quieter. The first night was nothing special. We drank a little, cooked hot dogs over the fire, told dumb stories, laughed a lot. Typical camping stuff. I remember falling asleep to the sound of crickets and the crackling of the fire as it died down. But the second night, that's when it happened. We were sitting around the fire again, just talking about nothing. It was probably close to midnight. I remember I was halfway through a beer when Lily, the quiet one in our group, suddenly stopped talking. Her face went pale. She was staring at something past the fire, out into the trees. At first, I thought maybe she saw an animal, but then she whispered, "There's a man." I felt my stomach drop. We all turned to look, and there he was, standing just at the edge of the firelight, completely still. At first, I thought maybe it was some hiker or another camper who stumbled onto our site, but the way he stood there, arms at his sides, head tilted just slightly, watching us, not moving, not reacting to us noticing him, just standing there. Nate was the first to say something. "Hey man, you okay?" No response. The guy didn't even flinch. "Do you need something?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. We shined a flashlight on him, and I swear to God, the second the light hit his face, he turned and walked. No, disappeared into the trees. Not like he ran, not like he was startled. He just moved out of sight, soundless, like he had been waiting for the light to touch him so he could leave. There was this moment of silence where we all just stared at each other, trying to process what the hell just happened. Then the debate started. Maybe it was just a lost hiker. At this hour, with no flashlight, he could be dangerous. We should leave. But the thing was, we were miles from our car, hiking back in the dark, through thick forest, with who knew what out there. That didn't seem like the smartest idea either, so stupidly, we stayed. Nobody slept well. I lay in my tent, wide awake, ears straining for any sound outside. I heard twigs snapping, but it could have been an animal, could have been the wind. That's what I told myself. Then, at around 3 a.m., Lily screamed. I shot up, unzipping my tent so fast I nearly tore it. She was already outside, shaking, her eyes wild with terror. Someone whispered my name, she said, barely able to get the words out. Right outside my tent, I thought it was one of you, but when I looked, no one was there. That was it. We packed up as soon as the sun started rising, too freaked out to stay another night. The entire hike back, I felt like we were being watched. None of us spoke much. We just wanted to get the hell out of there, but it didn't end there. Later that day, when we got home, we were all texting in our group chat, trying to make sense of it. That's when Nate said something that made my blood run cold. Check your phones. We didn't understand at first, but then we did. Two of us, me and Lily, had strange blurry photos in our camera rolls, taken in the middle of the night. They weren't pictures of us. They were taken from inside our tents, aimed at the thin fabric, like someone was trying to capture our silhouettes through the material. I don't know how they got there. I don't know who took them, but I know, without a doubt, that none of us did. So who did? The part that really gets me, the thing that keeps me up at night, is that in one of the photos, you can see the edge of a sleeve, just a small sliver of a dark-colored jacket in the corner of the frame, like someone was holding the phone up to take the picture and didn't realize part of them was in it. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, that maybe one of us had somehow taken the photos by accident. But there were two things that made that impossible. One, both Lily's and my phone had been inside our backpacks the whole night. I distinctly remember putting mine in the side pocket before I went to bed. There's no way I could have taken that picture. Two, the timestamps. Both photos were taken within 2 minutes of each other from two different phones while we were asleep. We compared them over and over, zooming in, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. But no matter how much we analyzed them, there was one fact that chilled me to the bone. In the second photo, the one taken on Lily's phone, the angle was slightly different, like whoever took it had moved just a little closer. That night, I barely slept. I locked my bedroom door, shoved a chair under the handle, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every sound outside my window made my skin crawl. I kept replaying everything in my head. Lily's scream, the man in the darkness, the whispers, the photos. I kept thinking, what if we hadn't left? What if we had stayed one more night? And the worst thought of all, the one I can't shake even now, years later, what if he followed us home? I don't know how to explain what happened to us in those woods. Every time I try, I get that same sick feeling in my stomach, like something is watching, listening, like it's not happy I'm talking about it. I used to love camping, being out in the wilderness, away from the noise, away from people. It was my way of resetting. Eric felt the same way. We'd gone on dozens of trips together over the years, always pushing further, deeper into places where no one else would go. We wanted isolation, adventure. But after this trip, I never set foot in the woods again. It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. We picked a spot deep in the mountains, a good 5-hour drive from the nearest town. No cell service, no people, just us and nature. The first day was exactly what we wanted. Fishing, hiking, a roaring fire as the sun dipped behind the trees. Everything was normal. Then, on the second day, we got stupid. Eric spotted an old path, barely visible through the undergrowth. It wasn't marked on our maps, no trail markers, nothing. "Looks like a shortcut," he said, grinning. "Probably an old hunting trail." I hesitated, but Eric was already stepping through the brush. I should have stopped him. I should have told him we needed to stick to the plan, but I didn't. I followed him in. At first it was fine, just a narrow path winding through thick trees, the air warm and still. But as we walked, the forest started to change. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, just silence. Then we found the campsite. It was abandoned, but not in the usual way. The tent was still there, half collapsed, its fabric torn like something had clawed at it. A backpack lay in the dirt, still full of clothes and supplies. A small fire pit sat nearby, long cold. Rotting food was scattered around, left behind like someone had fled in a hurry. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just emptiness. Eric and I exchanged a look. "Maybe they got lost," Eric muttered, kneeling to check the bag. But as he reached for it, a branch snapped somewhere behind us. We both froze. The sound wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, but there was nothing there, just shadows. "I think we should go back," I whispered. Eric nodded. He left the bag where it was, and we started walking, faster than before. But something was wrong. The trail didn't look the same. We should have been retracing our steps, but nothing was familiar. The trees, the rocks, everything felt off. Then we heard it, a whistle, low and slow, drifting through the trees. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, it was deliberate. Someone was out there. The whistle didn't come from one place, it came from everywhere, circling us, following us. We ran. We didn't talk, didn't think, just ran. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I didn't stop. The whistle never got closer, but it never faded either. It just stayed with us, like it was playing with us. By some miracle, we stumbled back into our campsite just as the last light of day slipped behind the trees. I have never felt so relieved to see a tent, a fire pit, our gear exactly how we left it. But something felt wrong. The forest was too still. It was like it was waiting. That night, neither of us slept. We kept the fire burning, listening, waiting. The whistle had stopped, but the woods felt watchful. Sometime past midnight, Eric dozed off, but I couldn't. I kept staring at the tent flap, expecting something to push against it, to claw at it. Then I woke up, not because of a sound, not because of a dream, but because of a feeling. The air inside the tent was freezing. My breath came out in shaky clouds. I turned my head slowly. Eric was still there, his face slack in sleep, but something was outside. I could hear it. Slow, deliberate breathing. Right on the other side of the tent wall. I didn't move, didn't even blink. I just listened, my heart hammering in my chest. The breathing was deep, steady. Inhale, exhale. Then something pressed against the tent fabric. Not a hand, not a paw, something else, something wrong. It traced along the nylon, slow, deliberate. I forced myself to breathe quietly, every muscle in my body screaming to run, to move, to do anything but stay frozen. Then As suddenly as it started, the breathing stopped. I stayed awake until dawn. When the first light touched the trees, I finally unzipped the tent, my hands shaking. The forest was empty, but right outside in the dirt was a single muddy footprint. It wasn't ours. We had taken our boots off before bed, and our prints were all over the place, but this one, it was different. It was facing inward, like someone had been standing there watching us as we slept. We packed up and left without a word. We barely spoke the whole way back, both of us pretending like we weren't scared out of our minds. We never reported the abandoned campsite. We didn't tell anyone about the footprint, because who would believe us? Who would believe that something out there, something we never saw, never heard properly, had been following us the whole time? I still think about that trip, about the missing camper, about the way the forest seemed to shift around us, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear it again. That slow, eerie whistle, calling me back. If you enjoyed those terrifying legends and stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more haunted stories. Until next week, sweet dreams.